kidding me?
All right, we're gonna try and bring IP on and see how this goes. So this is my brother Mike. We're trying to do a show with the fewest total letters, with the guest and the host possible. I mean, really, like we beat like Cher and Bono. Like we're like 5 total letters. That's awesome.
I know.
If you are familiar with Mike's and my history, I'm conspiracy Christian. I'm fringy, edgy, and he's much more scholarly, much more palatable, probably less controversial. And so we started off. A bunch of people were tagging him in my videos, basically like, "You got to debunk this guy. You got to debunk this guy." And finally he did, and that kicked off the Easter storm. Then we had the Mother's Day thing, which was a disaster on my end, by the way. I don't know if I want to get into that, but in this in this kind of mic battle, which is what it kind of reminds me of, we forged a relationship, and I think he kind of sees what I'm doing, and I see what he's doing. And the first thing I would say is, if you're not following IP, you have to. I talked to him last night, and I think he's the next Michael Heiser. I heard
Oh,
Michael
come on.
Heiser.
No.
I'm serious. He's what? You got 25 years to catch the guy. I think you're on track. And so we need his voice because Christianity has suffered for a long time from bad PR. And my take on that is I believe that the devil is also a real individual. I was hoping to talk to Mike about that later. And I think that he loves nothing more than to make Christianity and Christians and the Bible look stupid. And so to have a scholarly individual with the mind that he has representing Christianity, I'm all on board. So I know it seemed contentious with him and I, but I ask you to follow him. We need to get his account up and go consume his content. Check out his YouTube content, his long-form content. I think he's the real deal. So,
And let me just say, like, controversy is perfectly fine. It's okay to disagree. Like, for example, last year, I released an Exodus documentary, and then Egyptologist David Falk responded to it and tore it apart, basically destroyed it. So I took it down because I realized I made a lot of mistakes.
right.
And him and I are friends now, and he helped me work on the new one. So this is I've been down this road too. It's perfectly normal to, as long as we're still Christians and brothers, this is what we do.
Right, and to give you a little bit of insight, I think everybody wanted us to rah-rah fight each other. And my Discord group, actually, we talked beforehand, and they suggested a prayer, and I think that kind of set the tone. But Mike reached out to me, and he said, you got a lot of potential, but I need you to do your research, basically, and really challenged me. And that's good, because as Christians, we should hold each other accountable. And, I think the goal is the same: serve the living God, represent Jesus. There's so much ambiguity in Scripture, timelines, science. There's going to be interpretation. It's just how it's going to be. The book forces you to kind of choose your own adventure, make your own decisions about a lot of it. And so I think where this conversation should add a lot of value is his and my worldview is disparate. We believe on the keystone important things. You could trust the Bible. Jesus died for our sins. But most everything else, we're like, we're here and there. And as I've researched, the truth a lot of times ends up in the middle. And I think where you get into trouble is when you go, I know, you're wrong. But when we go, hey, this is what I believe, this is what I believe, assuming that our viewers are mainly Christian, we leave it to you to take it to God to make a decision. So anyways, tonight we're going to cover some basic stuff, kind of some foundational stuff. We're going to cover what he believes, what I believe, ask a few these are a little bit of softball questions, but I think it's important to set how this is going to go long term. And I think that by episode 2, 3, 4, we should get into the more like spicy things. And again, hopefully answer some questions that you guys have. I watched you do a live with John Steele, and honestly, you blew me away. Like I knew you were good, but you guys talked about the whole slavery discussion, like age of the earth. I forget everything, but it was awesome. So anyways, that's the plan with this. I don't know if you have any questions for me before we get going.
No, I think I'm good. I think I'm good whenever you are. So let's get going.
Cool. So it's 2022, and Christianity isn't exactly the in thing, I would say. you don't have to divulge too much, but thinking about the questions I would want to ask you. Can you describe your beliefs, what you believe, how you would quantify that?
Yeah. So I am a Christian. I accept all core doctrines. I believe in the virgin birth. I believe Jesus is divine. I believe in the Trinity. I believe in the inspiration of Scripture, the second coming, Jesus' physical resurrection. So every core doctrine I accept of Christianity. I will say I am a theistic evolutionist. I do a lot of debates and videos arguing that Genesis and evolution are compatible. I've done very few videos defending evolution because my position is simply that you want to attack evolution, fine, go that route. I don't care. I'm just here to show they're compatible with each other. So I tend to focus more on the idea that they could be coexistent, and you can be believe in the theory of evolution and still be a Christian without sacrificing any core doctrines. I also believe in the historical Adam. I believe there was literally a Garden of Eden. So I don't compromise on any of those issues either, and I find they're completely compatible with the theory of evolution. So with that out of the way, that's generally what I believe as a Christian. I accept core doctrines, believe in original sin, Adam, the first priest, Jesus, all of it. No issue there. I do want to say though, with you are right that Christianity does not seem to be in vogue right now. And my response to that is always like the changing and the shiftings of the tide.
Right.
That's what we should expect right now, actually, with the way the society's going, and we do through these cycles. You know, it's not going anywhere, and it's going to revert back, as even sociologists are noting. It's not going. These are just typical cycles. In 100 years, Christianity will be back in. Some sociologists, I can get the book here in a minute, have said Christianity will be back in vogue by 2100. So it's not. That's just the way the world works sometimes.
I love everything you said. I think that my viewers are going to appreciate that. I know I do. We might get into the science of that down the road. That's a big part of what I've done with this as a contrarian, anti-establishment, anti-official narrative guy. The apologetics of it might be a fun conversation. I don't want to do that tonight, but I appreciate that you said it's more so that you can make evolution and scripture work. And I think that's important. We had the flat earth discussion, and I'm not a flat earther, but I talk with flat earthers a lot, and I can see how flat earthers can make apologetics look bad and intelligent design advocates look bad. And I think probably in a similar way you feel similar about young earth creation. It's like the Bible's big and amazing and you're marginalizing God. And so I'm just saying that evolution works in the Bible. So I actually had the question. I was going to ask you if you believed in Adam. So that's great. That's awesome that you knocked that question out of the way, because I was going to go down the list like Jesus, Moses, down where does it end? But to believe in Adam, I think is really important. Implications,
Absolutely, yeah. Believing in an historical Adam is important.
very important. And that's amazing.
That's what I was going to say. Just agreeing with you, yeah.
That's amazing. And then I didn't think about the sociology of Christianity coming back, and I think your mindset is probably much more sustainable for like solid mental health as opposed to what I end up doing, where I'm like, oh, end of the world, this is crazy. The idea that man goes away from Christ, becomes more and more secular, kind of starts destroying itself, and then comes back. You're right, it is something we've seen over and over.
So, one thing I will say, there is a researcher named Michael Bloom, who is an evolutionary biologist, and he says that like religion, like Christianity, don't go away because they have built in them a self-correcting mechanism, and it's called repopulation. The more atheist, secular, liberal you get, the less kids you just naturally have.
Right.
So, like my old job, I was like the only Christian there, and I was also the only one with a kid. And there was like 4 or 5 different employees. They were all atheists or agnostic. None of them had kids, but I of course have kids. So Christians, well, right now we're going through this phase where Christianity is being heavily challenged, but Christian parents are responding and raising their kids more appropriately with more education, more protective measures on that, and they're also having more kids. And so it's going to be a corrective measure eventually. I don't see this as a huge problem. There's a book called "Shall the Religious Inherit the Earth?" And the guy basically argues that based on demographics and repopulation, in 100 years, Christianity still could be a high majority.
I was going to try not to be controversial, but for me, this whole World Economic Forum, global secular order, you've seen the population charts and the population growth charts and how they're, obviously we're tracking in a downward way. So I see this as like this very catastrophic, apocalyptic thing. For you to say that it's just error correcting and the ebb and flow gives me peace, man. I appreciate that take.
Well, I mean, even if I'm wrong, I think there's a big lag between us. So I think there's like 3 or 4 seconds. Just so I
Oh,
don't want to talk over you. I apologize for that. But even if I'm wrong, in the end of the world's gonna happen. It just means Christ is gonna come back. I don't personally think that is because my eschatology is probably different from yours. But I mean, either way, it's gonna work out. We've read the book. We know how the ending is gonna be. Christ will win. So just keep doing what he told us to do. Do the Great Commission. Focus on that. He's got the whole picture in mind.
I love it. I just I'm gonna say I love every word you say. It's weird. I don't mean to be such a fanboy, but look, if Jesus is coming, live the way the book says. It doesn't matter. You can't change it. You can't fix it. No reason to freak out about it.
Mm-hmm.
The I didn't want to talk about this, but I think it's kind of relevant to what we're talking about. You've read Josephus, right? You've read Josephus.
Mm-hmm.
So have you read him
Definitely, yeah.
talk about where when the flood happened, Nimrod was getting all the people were living in the hills and were afraid of the flood happening again, and he was encouraging encouraging urbanization. So he was encouraging the people to come into the valley of Shinar, and that through technology they were going to avoid the judgment of God again. Are you familiar with that part?
Vaguely, I do remember it. It's not something I ever really focused on in terms of my research, but I do know Josephus has that interpretation. It's extra biblical, so it's not something
Right.
taught in the Bible. But yeah, there is that concept of him he builds upon and tries to elaborate more on.
And so, what I kind of see going on is this global secular order is basically, if you listen to Yuval Noah Harari and these other people, they're talking about this. They're like, don't worry about God. We figured that out. We got life extension technology. We're going to put you in the metaverse. We're going to create man in our image, this kind of thing. And so, I've seen that as catastrophic, but error correcting is probably a better way to look at it.
Yeah, I think here's the thing, just don't lose hope. I see a lot of people get really into like eschatology and end time stuff, and it's like be just it even if it happens, what did Jesus say? Jesus gave us one thing, Great Commission.
Right.
I mean, let's focus on that. He'll take care of the things. Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Look at the birds of the air. Look at the lilies. God takes care of them. He's going to take care of us. But we have a specific thing, the Great Commission. Do that, and I'll take care of the rest. So that's been. I used to be a premillennialist, very much in eschatology about 10 years ago or so. And then one time, I think I just had like a mental breakdown, and I'm like, I just can't keep doing this. It was so exhausting and terrifying. And then I realized, you know what? It doesn't matter. I can't control the powers that be, but I can control one thing, and that's my aspect in the Great Commission, and that's what I'm going to do.
And Jesus never once says, get guns, get gold, stockpile. It's not in the book. We've read the book. It's not in there. So, this,
Yeah. Don't.
yeah, I think we'll cover more of that later, but kind of trying to stay foundationally. And you don't have to answer this, or you can answer however you want, but why? I know this is when I sent you the email on this, why would you be a Christian in 2022? What compels you to believe this story today?
Well, the data does not change. There is still a lot of strong evidence for the reliability of the New Testament. There's a lot of strong evidence for the reliability of the Old Testament. In fact, ever since Kenneth Kitchen, there has been more and more data that is supporting Old Testament reliability. So you go back to the 60s, there were very few scholars that believed in like historical Exodus, historical Moses. There are more what we would call biblical maximalists today, as Dr. Falk has said, than there have been for the past couple decades. So even though there's still a minority, there's still more and more coming out. And of course, main reason I'm a Christian is because I still think the evidence for the resurrection is strong. I've seen skeptics argue naturalistic hypotheses to explain away the resurrection. I've seen their data. I think they're not. I think it's a double standard in the way they argue a lot of these things. I think when you start looking at how Christianity began with the resurrection, the belief in the resurrection, it's very hard to argue for naturalistic theories to explain how the Christians came to believe in the resurrection, how they started propagating this idea, why many of them were persecuted and died for their faith. We cannot confirm all of them, but a lot of them we can. Why they were willing to believe such a crazy thing. And so when you start comparing things, for me, I still think following scholars like Mike Licona, I still think the resurrection hypothesis is the best explanation and the simplest, the most parsimonious. I, if anyone could offer a not naturalistic explanation that would be more parsimonious, I would have to change my view. But I have seen it time and time again, and I've seen a lot of videos on YouTube from skeptics trying to argue against the resurrection. So you'll always see problems with that. So for me, it's the resurrection. It's the Christianity is the only religion that was, well, the most prominent and biggest, I guess you could say. Maybe there's some smaller ones, but the only world major religion that was not started because some guy had private revelations and delivered them. It started because a group of people had a guy was publicly crucified, publicly buried, and then his tomb was publicly found empty. And a group of people claimed to have seen him and were given revelations from him, and then they spread it out. It would have been very easy to debunk this quite easily because it was a public proclamation. Just show us the tomb, show us the body. Uh, didn't happen. It's not like, for example, Mormonism or Islam, where you have one guy getting private revelations and you just got to trust him. You can cross-reference and check these things. And so, again, for me, it's the resurrection.
I love that you talked about the resurrection because Christianity, it basically, we look foolish believing in a virgin birth. Interesting that there's a virgin birth and then the resurrection. Those are like two really out there things to believe. But if you just look at kind of, let's just say the sociology, I may be misusing that word, but the apostles, the disciples that were there, were in love with this man. He was healing people. The whole time they were trying to figure out if he was the real deal. They think he is. Maybe he isn't. He's challenging them. It's this really difficult thing. And then he dies this totally embarrassing, horrific death. And they're coping with the death of this person that they loved, that they thought was the Messiah, who now died like a criminal. Like any human being in that situation would just run away and cut their losses and go, man, I really blew that. How embarrassing. They wouldn't go, well, now let's go die for this guy and start this religious system. Like the resurrection is the only thing that would make sense for the way that they reacted to his death, I think.
Well, it's entirely divorced from the cultural context we know of Jewish messianic movements. Could you imagine someone like Simon Bar Giora? This was the alleged Messiah around 70 AD that caused the Romans to sack the temple, and they took him back to Rome and executed him on the spot to humiliate him. So he was either thrown off a rock or beheaded in Rome. Could you just imagine his followers coming along and saying, no, this proves he's the Messiah because he was resurrected. And now we're going to go out and proclaim. I mean, it would have been unheard of. That's not what his followers did. They dispersed and they got themselves a new Messiah eventually. Simon Bar Kochba with the later rebellion around 130 AD. That's what Jewish messianic movements did. Christianity is really divorced from its cultural context. No Jews expected the Messiah would have to die and rise. No Jews were expecting him to. They were expecting him to be a conquering hero to save them from Rome, from the Gentiles. And for the Christians, the early Christians, who were Jews, who came out and said, no, the fact that he was crucified proves that he is the Messiah because he resurrected. People were like, what? I mean, we know the early Christians were mocked for this belief. Celsus, for example, mocks the Christians for this. Earliest depiction of Jesus being crucified is actually him with the head of a donkey. And then it's like Alaxamos worships his God. And they're mocking him for this idea. Paul admits, it's like a folly. It's a folly to the Jews, this idea. It was so divorced from the cultural context, no one would have expected this to emerge from the Jewish background.
I think maybe we do a whole show on the Jewish religious culture at the time of Jesus and how they missed the prophecy of Messiah, because when you look at the prophecies and the way Jesus fulfilled them, it makes perfect sense. But if Jesus Christ was God on the earth and these people, the religious right was supposed to be representing God, God shows up on the earth and they kill him, means they were probably pretty far off on interpreting Scripture. And then if you, we have in our Discord, we have a couple Israeli Jews that we talked about Jesus for a few hours, and the anti-Jesus basically smear campaign inside of, fundamentalist religious Judaism is really intense to this day. So what I think happens is that the devil, once Jesus died and was resurrected, the devil realized he was beat. And so he had to start this aggressive information campaign to discredit the thing that happened because he couldn't change that it did happen. And I think we still see that too today with the smear on Christianity. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, Jesus did talk about the fact the world will persecute and hate you. I mean, if he predicted this kind of thing, he knew. He said in Matthew 10, "I'm coming to bring a sword," metaphorically speaking. I'm not here to make peace with the world. I'm here to wage war on the ideas and the beliefs of the world, and they're gonna reject this. It's gonna be hard. It's gonna take a long time for it to be accepted. But I'm very optimistic about the future, to be honest. So I think eventually the Great Commission will win out. It's just going to take several thousand years.
Right. Well, you said what Jesus is doing ideologically is at war with the world. I think this is probably a good time to try and define what that means. He's not at odds with the earth that he created, the world system, right? The world system that has historically been at odds with the God of the Bible. I don't know if you would agree with that, but this is kind of why I'm a conspiracy theorist. There is a concerted anti-God effort, whether you want to call it economic world, popular world, whatever this is. But when Jesus caused that division, I think it was the people that knew him and know him draw closer to him, and the people that don't go further. But I think at the heart of it, it's just people wanting to know God or do what they want to do and not be accountable to a God. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
But yeah, this is the story we see in Genesis 11. There's a degradation process. You eventually get to the Tower of Babel incident, which is supposed to be that the world has become so divorced from what the truth is. They have set up these weird cultural ideas that are just backwards entirely. So, like, the whole account of Genesis 11 is to mock the Babylonian religions because they have anthropomorphized God. They turned him into this sort of like this human construct that's supposed to be impressed by ziggurats, that is supposed to come down and glorify them. And so God says, well, your idea of me is so divorced from reality, I'm going to disperse you out. Then we see right after this, we see he picks Abraham. He says, I'm going to bring humanity back to me very slowly. I'm going to start with this guy. So he's the first step. Moses will be the next step. Then the prophets. Then I will come myself as the Messiah to bring it to the most important step of all. So it's this slow process of trying to bring us back to how God originally wanted us when he set up Eden.
Amen. I haven't said it in a little while. If you guys aren't following IP, please follow his account. I'm 100% behind his operation, and it's I don't know if he's being shadow banned or if that's a thing or whatever. But he's just right at 10,000 followers. He needs to be at 100, and he's not controversial. So in theory, he should just be able to keep growing that. So please follow IP if you're not. I wanted to the next question.
I'm controversial.
Yeah.
I can be controversial. I've been trying to do more comical style videos. Oh, okay. No, I was sorry. There's like a 3-second lag, I think. So I feel like we just accidentally keep talking over one another. But yeah, no, I do respond to some people, and sometimes I can be a little harsh. Apologize for that. I've been trying to make the videos on TikTok more fun, but on my YouTube channel, I go into a lot more in-depth stuff because I have more time to break things down. Like I'm currently working on my 3-part Exodus series right now, and we're going to have that final part 3 up in July, and I can promise you there will be a lot of good data to support the conquest. We're going through a lot of archaeological reports, a lot of internal evidence from the Pentateuch, specifically, or the book of Joshua, specifically. But yeah, that's where I do a lot of my more detailed work.
I wanted to do more biblical archaeology later, but you mentioned Joshua. What are your thoughts on the Ebal stone, the cursed tablet that they just found?
I really, really want it to be true. Like I am hoping and praying that this turns out to be valid. Now the Ebal altar on Mount Ebal is pretty valid. Adam Zertal, who worked on the site, dated it to the time of the conquest. That's pretty much generally accepted. It fits. They've noted it fits the kind of altar structure you see in the tabernacle described in the Pentateuch. So it's a great thing. The curse thing. My problem with this is it's coming from ABR. That's Associates for Biblical Research, and they have put some stuff out that the scholarly community has said this is lunacy. Like this is just wrong on every area. And they've announced they found this back in March. They did not publish their findings yet, and to me, that's a red flag.
Wow.
I really want this to be accurate, and I'm not making a final opinion until they release the final reports. And David Falk and I are going to go on my channel to discuss it when those come out. When the high resolution images come out, we will discuss it on there, talk more about it, and make our final conclusions from there on. But until they release their final reports, till we actually get to see what they claim they found, because they've not released their findings, they've not released any high resolution images. I can't say either way, but I really hope they actually found something.
Yeah, if they do, it's an absolute game-changing archaeologic revelation for the time frame. I mean, you put the name of Yahweh and you put that validity at 3,500 years ago or whatever. I mean that's going to be a huge win for us for sure. So I agree. You mentioned I was watching a video. I didn't have this question queued, so I apologize. But the video that you did about the Exodus and kind of just looking at proof of the Exodus, but you mentioned that they hadn't found anything at Sinai. Do you have you
Mm-hmm.
seen the real Exodus trail or like the search for the real Mount Sinai? The more north idea of where Jabal el Lawz is, and the burnt mountain top, and the 40 palms of Elam, and the crossing at the Red Sea, and the rock at Horeb, and all of that. Have you seen any of that?
I have seen some of that. The problem is there is not really been excavated by an expert. There have been amateurs who have done surveys of the sites. Uh, I don't really know where Sinai was. I have not looked into that much because the scholarly community is quite divided on this. Most say it is in Sinai somewhere, but there are differing views on where that mountain is. Arabia has not been excavated a lot, like
Mm-hmm.
Sinai has not been excavated a lot. So it's like one of those things like I don't think it's not historical. I just think you got like at the most 100,000 people moving into Sinai for about 40 years, and then maybe into Arabia. You're not going to leave behind a lot of evidence.
Right.
And those things that Arabian Mountain, again, there's a lot of experts that have not had a chance to look at it. So it's like one of those things that's like, I don't know. I'm just going to be agnostic on it. The real evidence for the Exodus is going to be in what we've already found, like when Avaris was abandoned. We know when that was. It's during the Ramesside period. We know that 40 years later, there was a population boom in Canaan. I mean, like sometimes sites, areas, there's like 5 times the amount of sites. All of us, like 40 years after Avaris is abandoned. Who knew? Oh, and those new sites, they lack pig bones entirely. Although the previous layers, older layers, have pig bones. All of a sudden, so in Canaan, 40 years after a key city in Egypt is abandoned, there's a population boom in Canaan, and these new sites just don't lack pig bones entirely. They have new pottery structures. Hazor is burned at the same time. So tell me, it seems like there's a pretty good fit right then and there.
Right. So we'll do. I love that, but I want to do this more later. I'm trying to think how I can flip my camera. Let me see if I can do this really quick. Flip camera. So you've seen this, the rocket
Oh,
Horeb,
oh no.
right?
Yeah,
You're not in on
yeah,
that?
I've
I
seen
mean,
that.
there's a few
The
other things.
problem with that, no, those structures are throughout the Sinai. They're also throughout Arabia. Um, that's not really been proven to be any sort of like weird thing. We see that sort of happening from wind itself, creating those kind of structures. It's wind actually can cut through those rocks over several millions of years, whatever you want to say. If you're young earther, it
Right.
would not take that long, but we see those all throughout the desert.
Okay. Well, I just in the video you mentioned that there wasn't any legitimate evidence found at Sinai, which I'm assuming you're talking about the Sinai Peninsula. And from my research, the scholarly
Mm-hmm.
Sinai Peninsula, the kind of the accepted view of the Sinai Peninsula, was actually given to archaeologists by a fortune teller. And to me, it's like throwing people off the scent of this Exodus trail. This Exodus trail where they crossed the Red Sea. There was a pillar erected by Solomon on one side and a pillar on the other side, and you end up with a burnt mountain and altars, and it's pretty cool. If you haven't seen it, I'll send it to you. But I think that actually kind of segues into a discussion that I think we're going to have quite a bit about my aversion to the scholarly narrative. I know that you put a lot of stock into it, and I basically, and I'm guilty of this, but I see today's media, the anti-God information, this trust the science, kind of this whole information stream that we're suffering as being from the father of lies. Talk about misinformation. I mean, this is what Jesus said that the devil was misinformation. And I think that there's a kind of an like a concerted effort to invalidate anybody looking for proof of the Bible or believing in the Bible. So that's more of a statement than a question, but it goes into the question that I
Well,
wanted.
well, I
Oh, go
want to
ahead.
actually add something to that.
Go.
Oh, I was going to say you're not far off. We can talk about some studies on Christianophobia or Christian bias. There's actually been studies published on this.
Yeah. I watched a documentary or a video on your YouTube about that, and I love it. I'm sorry about the delay. I know it's kind of awkward, but maybe we talk about that sociology, the Christianophobia thing. But I want to frame it inside of this question. This is a little bit of kudos to you, and also so people know, what you're working on. But you just got your master's in philosophy, which means that my guess is that you have been in university over the last few years. What has been the experience of a Christian biblical literalist in academia? You have to have been discriminated against. People have to like constantly be gaslighting you. Tell me about it.
No, I mean it didn't really come up. I felt like I was generally accepted in the program. I did not have any. I don't think I've experienced any discrimination, to be honest. Most people didn't even know I was a Christian because it just didn't come up. Like I'm just there to get my degree. Some people did know, and I talked about it when it came up. But I mean, like for the first year it was COVID, so I was doing online classes. So like I didn't really meet any of these. For the first year I didn't barely knew anyone. So like the whole year is just like Zoom meetings. So it was like you don't really meet people well with Zoom meetings. So the second year I met some more people, and I don't think I'd experienced any discrimination. But I mean, there was the university program, University of Arizona, does not have a big philosophy of religion program. So like I would have loved to have taken more classes on philosophy of religion, arguments for God's existence. They just didn't come up. So I'm spending classes doing like politics, philosophy of ethics, a lot of ethics stuff. Did a lot of research on ethics, as well as like philosophy of causation, agency. So I mean, it just didn't come up, and people that knew I was a Christian didn't seem to care, and we just got along fine. So I didn't personally experience any sort of discrimination. I recommend the program. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot there. But I mean that there are some studies that do say there is Christian bias in academia for sure. I mean that just wasn't my experience.
Okay, well that's encouraging. Again, I can be pretty manic, and I can be, I'm very polarizing in my life, in my content. I'm hot and cold, which is funny because my name's Luke, and Jesus says not to be lukewarm, so I think he's got a joke with me on that. But I have this general belief system that I've kind of built up that whether you're James Tour or Stephen Meyer or even Mike Heiser at a certain level, if you come out saying you believe in the Bible, the academic, what would you club, the Nobel laureates, let's say in science, they don't take you very seriously. But you're saying I'm being sensationalist with that. It's not the case.
No, I'm not sure what you mean by sensationalist. I mean, there have been studies. Like there was a study, like George Yancey has published work on Christianophobia. It's definitely there. He says there is evidence that levels of animosity experienced by conservative Christians is comparable to animosity experienced by marginalized social groups. So I mean, there is definitely. I mean, there is definitely in academia this idea that Christianity is dumb or stupid and needs to be pushed out of the way. Studies have found this that Christians will be rated less hireable or likable by people in academia. So I've not experienced it, but I do know it's there from the research.
Wow, it's pretty amazing that a Jewish carpenter 2,000 years ago could be affecting the hireability of someone today, especially when he was talking about loving everybody and being good to your brother and not judging and trying to be doing the right thing even when nobody's looking. So that's seems like to me my experience with Christians. A lot of them were very hireable. Although I've had the bad egg Christians that are like, yeah, Jesus, Jesus, and they're stealing too. So people are people.
Hmm.
I I have this one's. I'm trying to think of how I want to word this. On TikTok, there's this big trend in these debates, and to me, it's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. But it's constantly prove God prove to me God exists. To me, it's ridiculous because if God wanted it to be proof, he wouldn't have gone to such great lengths to remain semi-anonymous. I believe he requires us to have faith. But what are your thoughts on the whole prove God to me? Is it possible? Just kind of philosophically, how do you approach that question when you're asked?
So you can't prove God for the same reason you can't prove you're not a brain in a vat. How do you prove you're not a butterfly dreaming you're a man? How do you prove naturalism? These are things that cannot be proven. When people says prove to me God, it immediately tells me I don't think they know what they're talking about. Even atheist philosophers are not going to expect you to be able to prove God. One thing I remind people is that there's a common belief among laymen that religion has been being pushed aside constantly. Belief in God is constantly being replaced by natural explanations. And that's not true. That, in fact, the opposite is true.
Yep.
The more we have been studying science, the more evidence we are finding for God's existence, the more ammo we have for our metaphysical worldview. So, like, what has been being eroded away is natural gods like Thor or Zeus or Poseidon, because we keep discovering natural processes. We don't need natural gods. But I mean, the arguments for God's existence, like cosmological arguments or teleological arguments, are not being eroded away at all. They're being strengthened, in my view. So, like 100 years ago, it was commonly believed that the universe was eternal.
Mm-hmm.
There was never a point where it needed to be created. That had a problem for Genesis. But then what happened is Alexander Friedman, George Lemaitre's are working with Einstein's equations, and they say this sort of proves the universe expanded at one point. It has a beginning point, and it was rejected by the scientific community at first. Sir Arthur Eddington wrote the idea that a beginning point is morally repugnant. Einstein rejected it. Fred Hoyle mocked it, calling it the Big Bang. That's where the term comes from. And of course, the data came out confirming it. Then we also found out there's extreme levels of fine tuning in the universe, that the constants that hold the universe together are on a razor's edge. Like if the universe is currently expanding, if that was off by like 1 in 120th, like 1 in 10 to the 120th power,
Yep.
The universe would either collapse back in on itself or would expand too fast for atoms to even form. That's the cosmological constant. So that seems like there has to be some sort of intelligence behind the creation of the universe.
Right.
Now we're discovering in quantum field theory there really isn't any sort of underlying substance. Like when the further down we go discovering reality, we don't really find that we need particles or substances. These just seem to be ripples in quantum fields reducing information. The universe just seems itself to not even to be emergent in and of itself. So like it's this idea that it's not fundamental in and of itself. If it's not like there's an underlying fundamental substance, it seems to be emergent. And if it's emergent, it's got to be emergent from something. And I've used arguments like the digital physics argument to argue that that is most likely God.
Yes, well, I'm a simulation guy. My first piece of content I made is about the simulation. So I love digital physics. I think it's a really good thought experiment,
We
at
agree
least.
on that.
Oh,
I have a lot of good stuff on my YouTube channel on that. Like I did a video recently called Mind or Matter, which is fundamental, and arguing that we're very similar to. I wouldn't say we are a simulation. I would say we're very similar to a simulation. It's just that the universe itself just seems to be information. Consciousness is probably more likely fundamental. That's why I'm an idealist. And this all points back to a theistic creator of some sort. And so I've done a lot of work on this, going into things like quantum field theory, quantum physics, showing that the universe is quite literally emergent in how it structures. There's no idea. There's matter itself is information. It does not reduce to a substance.
I just my viewers are like their minds blown that nobody expected to take this left turn, but I intended to bring this up with you down the road. So I couldn't agree more. We're in an information-based reality. I think that is in line with Scripture, what Torah says, and then the operating system, which is the first documentary I made. I posit that if we are in a simulation, and let me say first that I think we're in something like a simulation. People have heard me talk about this for hours on this live show, so I'm not saying it is digital, but if it is a simulation, I postulate that the Torah is the source code. It's the operating system, which is I'd love for you to watch my documentary on it. I put that out in 2018.
Maybe.
Right. So a couple like I made
Yeah,
a
I'll take a
million.
look.
I made a million notes there. You talked about quantum field theory, which is really exciting and absolutely is leaning to information-based reality. There's no the most likely scenario for what quantum field theory is that we're in a simulated reality. Same thing with quantum entanglement, in my opinion, the Wigner thought experiment, the Wigner experiment, all these things. So you mentioned the name Einstein, and you're right. They said steady state universe. They hated that it was emergent, that it had a beginning. The anti-theist natural science order hated this idea. They hated when Watson and Crick decoded the genome. All of these things lend to a created order, and they wanted to explain this through purely natural means. So, somebody who isn't talked about enough as being one of the huge propagandists or promoters of this is Albert Einstein. Einstein was very naturalistic, even to where when quantum, the Copenhagen definition of quantum mechanics came through, Einstein said, I don't accept this reality, and he wasted the latter part of his career trying to unify natural reality with quantum physics with the unified field theory, which was totally a bust.
Oh yeah, we know that now from the experiment in the '80s using the Bell inequality. It was violated, and then of course Bell himself retreated to non. This is a lot of technical jargon, but he retreated to something called the Leg inequality. Well, Anton Zellinger in about 2006, 2007 also showed the that was also violated. So I mean, there is no escape. At this point, there are no hidden variables in quantum mechanics if you know what this whole theory is. If not, see some of my videos like Quantum Physics Debunks Materialism, Mind or Matter, which is fundamental, the emergent universe on my YouTube channel. I explain a lot of this in there. But essentially what the research is pointing to is that at the bottom level, there are no particles that we think of, because we think of like these little balls bouncing around,
Right.
like think of like Democritus and the atoms. That's all we are, just atoms in the void. That's not what the research is showing. Not at all. Quantum field theory. So let me just define a particle as it's defined in the book Particles, Fields, and Forces. Schmidt says this. He says, particles are actually waves in different types of fields. This goes for all the particles that we are made of. We are all just made of waves in a field. The vacuum is not something empty, but contains fields that are waving all the time. What looks like a billiard ball on a billiard table is actually a bunch of waves moving from the cue to the pocket. So this idea that we are like little balls or a collection of little balls that we call particles is just not true. We
Right.
are like different like fields or something, these little like waving type things that sort of make the emergence of particles. But waves itself, what are those? Is that some sort of underlying substance? No. There was a great paper by David John Baker published a couple of years ago who showed that waves and particles sort of stand together. Again, it just sort of reduces to information. There's a whole new theory out called ontic structural realism. I'll say it again, ontic structural realism. It's very important because philosophers and physicists like Minor Kuhlman have been arguing this, that at the base level, at the most fundamental level of our physical reality is not a substance, it's just information. There's structures, there is mathematical equations, information essentially. That's what physical reality reduces to. It does not reduce to a substance. If that's the case, that makes a huge problem for materialism because our reality reduces to information. Then you can philosophically argue, as I have done, that what produces information and is immaterial? A mind. The
Right.
universe is information processing from a mind.
Yep. So, I mean, again, I was hoping to do like a series, and maybe we do like a advanced apologetics, not looking at geology and anthropology, but looking at quantum physics. I don't know a lot of people that are doing that, but you and I are exactly on the same page. So, a couple things. Materialism is dead. Okay. Materialism is at least on life support, and what I say is that it's kept on life support by the priests of the religion of science. This is something that was an idea sold to us. It was something that they, by controlling the information of the scientific narrative, they could kind of suppress this for a long time. Although you're right, Democritus and Plato talked about idealism and materialism 2,000 years ago. Now we're getting, as we look further and as we look deeper in and being able to see things, at the smallest levels, it screams design. It's an intelligently designed order, most likely. And what I think, like, this is why I think this. I hope that you and I can see this through, because I feel like we're very similar. I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but I went through trauma, religious trauma, all these things. I came back to God, even though I was mad at God. Not that that happened to you, but because as a logical thinking,
Oh
rational
no, it did.
thinking person,
I have religious trauma for sure.
even another thing to talk about. So I came back to God because the most likely explanation for what we see in this reality is a designer. And then if you look at the Bible and you look at it through the lens of historic accuracy and kind of these bigger concepts about the human condition, and then you add to it that Jesus Christ most likely rose from the dead, you end up logically being a Christian. It sounds like maybe that's where we both are.
Yeah, I'd say so. I would say though materialism is definitely dead. What a lot of more naturalistic philosophers do is they retreat to physicalism. So just to clarify, materialism is a type of physicalism. Physicalism is the idea that all is material substance of some sort. Materialism is a type. It's the idea that everything reduces to particles.
Right.
But materialism is dead. We know that everything does not reduce to particles. So they retreat to physicalism. It's this idea that maybe there's some maybe there's this underlying material substance that produces quantum field theory, which then produces particles, which then produce everything. And it just is like you're almost there. Like if you just would say, like, well, what could possibly be not made of particles and would produce an information construct like we live in? That sounds like a mind. So again, theism is just makes more sense, and you just got to take the scientific data, an idealistic idea, with a lot of the research which the theistic philosopher Richard Swinburne has done, and you get a very clear theistic picture of the worldview as the simplest explanation of reality.
Right. I would quantify or try to boil down idealism versus materialism in a really simple thought experiment that everybody can do, regardless of your scientific prowess. And it's one of these two statements is true. Either the physical world, the material world, created consciousness, or a consciousness created this material world, right? One of those two is true. And obviously, what you're talking about, the different variations, there's more to it than that. But what's more realistic? If you walked in and you found my phone, let's say, or whatever, and you went, did some natural process create this information, or did an intelligent mind create it? I mean, to me, it's the most likely, most reducible idea. So I love that we
Well,
have. Go ahead.
I got something else I can add here. So the whole issue with is called the hard problem, and it's called how does material stuff create consciousness? This is called the hard problem. It's not a hard problem. It's the hard problem. It's not a hard problem if you go in reverse, and I can show you quite easily. So pick up your phone. Pick up your phone again. Just describe your phone for me now.
It is black, 3.5 inches by 6 inches, shiny on one side, matte on the other side.
Okay, so you've described it as black, shiny. You've described it in terms of dimensions, so abstract dimensional. Like you've described everything in terms of mental properties there. Black is a color. There is no, wavelengths hit the eye, create a chemical reaction, create electrical signal in the brain. Color appear. Color is a mental quality. Shininess, mental quality.
Right?
Describe me that object without using mental qualities. You
Impossible.
can't. Everything you experience is mental world. We live in a mental world. So it's very easy to show how the physical can emerge from the mind. It's information contingent upon mind. It's the hard problem to try to explain how consciousness could come from physical substances. So this is called bundle theory in philosophy. It goes back to David Hume, and idealists picked it up immediately. It's this idea that physical objects, according to David Hume, physical objects are a collection of properties. You take an apple, you can describe it as red, shiny, round, hard. Everything you're describing is a mental property. You take away all the properties, what are you left to describe it? There's no substance there. You don't need substance to describe matter. Matter is just information. It's a collection of properties, according to bundle theory. Fits with idealism. So everything we know about matter, we're going to describe it in terms of mental substance, mental properties, mental aspects. You don't need to invoke a separate substance other than consciousness and mind. It's all just information. So Yippee ki yay! But yet you don't need that kind of stuff to describe this kind of stuff. So this is the whole idealist account. Matter easily reduces to properties of the mind. Mind cannot be reduced to physical substances. It's impossible.
Right. That reminds me a little bit of the thought experiment of numbers being proof of God, and Jason Lyle and guys like this kind of talk about it, but it's a pretty strong argument that that where the numbers would have originated from, and that we can conceive of them. I mean, you can make an argument for design just through that, but rather than try to butcher that, I would like to say, as a conspiracy theorist, that when Madonna, who was propped up by the system as this overly sexual, kind of very secular pop star. She's saying we're living in a material world. So I am a material girl, very Edward Bernays and very consumerist, whatever. You just said we live in a mental world, which would be the opposite of material world, in an idealist world. Therefore, you are a believer in God. So Madonna's version is she lives in a material world, so she is a material girl, and your Madonna cover is that we live in an idealist world, so therefore you believe in an intelligent designer. Easy deduction.
I mean, it just naturally follows that if you're going to believe consciousness is fundamental, we got to think about where consciousness comes from. So this is an argument I put forward on my YouTube channel. It's called the cosmic conscious argument for God's existence, and it follows just generally like if consciousness is fundamental, you got to think about where our consciousness comes from. And it also reminds me of something you said there of the screw tape letters that C.S. Lewis wrote. These are a series of fictional letters that he wrote of a senior demon training a younger demon. And at one point he says,
Wormwood.
remember to keep them focused on the external world. That's the real world you want them to think. That's what needs to be in focus there. And it's very true. That's what materialism does. A lot of idealists, even if they're not Christian, get very centered on the idea of exploring virtues, their own mental reality, trying to grow that. And I think that's what we need to do. Let's not think the material world is primary. Our joy is found not in material things, but in much greater spiritual things.
So we talked about this before, I think, or maybe in passing or a phone call or whatever, but C.S. Lewis is my hero. I very much try to emulate what I'm doing. Not obviously not well. He's a generational genius, but the idea of taking Christian concepts and popularizing them in digestible ways that the masses can consume, and maybe they don't even know what they're getting. This is a big thing that I want to do. And if you guys haven't read the Screw Tape Letters, you have to. He's all over it. His books after that about the scientific technocracy that was taking over that he was very afraid of. He totally prophesied, I think, everything that we're seeing. The materialist thing, I have a series that I'm working on, which I've got about 12 of these airplanes in the air. But it's Jesus versus Einstein. Very VOR to do this. But I'm talking about how Jesus taught about inside, about being not having a high overhead, and about treating others right when nobody's looking, being a servant. He basically taught the antithetical kind of philosophic concepts to what naturalism and materialism teaches. And this whole thing about rich man, he has to sell all the stuff to follow me, and the guy didn't. And the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. He was a minimalist, extreme minimalist. And what's interesting about this C.S. Lewis idea of this external materialist thing that we were talking about, in this series that I'm working on, this Jesus versus Einstein series, Einstein really propagated this idea. A lot of the natural scientists did. And materialism is causing untold emotional damage, emotional and mental distress, obviously consumer distress, debt. People are trying to figure out what this reality is. I'm just a consumer. I go to work, I get the things, I reward myself with the thing that I buy, and nobody's happy. People are miserable. So I think it's interesting that you brought that up. And really, if you could just quantify it, and maybe you could talk about this a little bit. Christians are largely happier. I've seen your studies on that. And anti-theists and anti, kind of embracing Jesus thing, materialists can, on some metrics anyways, struggle with mental, emotional health. I don't know if you want to speak to that at all.
So there have not been a lot of studies on atheists particularly. They're an understudied group, to be sure. There have been a lot of studies on Christians, though, for sure, and Christians do correlate with higher levels of overall quality of life, agreeableness, conscientiousness, these kinds of things. They definitely show up in the studies, and that is so robust. It's given now. When I talk to sociologists about internet atheists doubting those kind of stuff, they're like, "What are they? What? Like that's ridiculous. This is just so confirmed." Uh, Christians have been studied so much at this point; it's ridiculous to say that it doesn't. But when we talk about that form of materialism, when you're talking about it's this whole consumerism idea, that can definitely come from many different areas. It can come from just trying to play the game, trying to win money. And sometimes Christians can fall in that. Of course, it's the disease. I'd say
Right.
that the Madonna type materialism. This idea that like if you live in this world, you want to become happy. Now, what I would say this is I would say it's an offshoot of utilitarianism. I don't say it is core what utilitarianism was, but it's sort of like this offshoot of what it is. Utilitarianism was the idea that what is good is that we increase the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest amount of people. Now, Mill, for example, when he put this forward, did not mean consumerism, materialism, but that's how it's often been interpreted. And so now people think, well, I need to be happy. Happiness is good. That is at foundation what is supposed to be. You always hear it today. We're like, I just want you to be happy. That we hear that in Disney movies all the time. I just want you to be. It doesn't matter what you do. I just want you to be happy. That is antithetical to the gospel. Sorry if that hurts, but the gospel says, I just want you to be a virtuous saint. Then happiness will follow secondarily from that. To
Right.
get to there is going to cause suffering, but suffering on the road to real happiness, you have to go through the virtuous stage, and that is going to deal with suffering. That is a problem with today's culture, is that we focus too much on just trying to be happy now, not focus on who we are, what is our nature, how are we going to become better people, and the importance of suffering in that. This is a strong Catholic tradition that has gone back for thousands of years on the importance of suffering. Sometimes it goes too far. Don't get me wrong. I can think of some that definitely took it too far, but suffering is important
Stigmatics.
in the Christian tradition to turn us into virtuous saints, virtuous characters that we need to focus on and become. And the problem with the materialist world is it's like just focus on being happy now. It's like raising a child. You don't want your child. You want your child to be happy, but you don't want them to be
Right.
spoiled happy. I have to make my daughter unhappy sometimes so she becomes a better person and
Right.
experiences a much more fulfilling life.
Right.
If I just gave her what I want because I want her to be happy, she's going to be
Right.
miserable. And that's the problem we have a lot of people today. They're just trying to be happy and they're trying to spoil themselves with material possessions and they're going to become ultimately miserable.
Right. And the irony is that because we are designed, I say, with a God shaped hole in our heart, what makes you happy or fulfilled is knowing the Creator. And so they've separated us from the Creator, which well, I think through basically scientific propaganda, but that's the conversation we will have down the road. But then they say, you need to fulfill every desire. It needs to be absolute satiation of the things that you want. We're taught that basically through neurolinguistic programming, and I may be misspeaking. You could tell me if I'm wrong about that. I'm not a neuroscientist, but I studied a little bit, and behavioral scientist. But basically, you do the thing and you get a reward, right? Like a dog treat. And like so, we do our thing. We go to work. We pay our taxes. We do our good job. We get a thing. What's the thing you get? Oh, whatever, a video game, a car, all these things. And so now you get this endorphin rush or this dopamine rush or whatever because you get the thing, and then you have buyer's remorse. So you got to get another thing, and it's just constantly it's appeasing the flesh, negating this relationship with God, driving you deeper into debt, which makes you depressed, and then you're like, God, why did you do this to me? Right? It's a pretty smart plan, really.
Yeah, it definitely is true. This idea that materialism is going to somehow fulfill us, and it is that kind of consumer thing. You always need the next best thing. Uh, that is just essentially what we have seen in the biblical texts. I mean, think about how Solomon he was so wealthy, kept getting all these wives, and he was just miserable. He had to
Right?
chase after other gods constantly. Uh, it's never going to be. And then think about how happy Paul was, who was a poor preacher selling tents, and how
Yes.
he just felt so fulfilled and happy. Uh, People have like the wrong idea about how to get happiness today. They don't understand that these temporary dopamine kicks are it's like a drug addiction in a lot of ways, and it's eventually going to destroy you. Find purpose, find fulfilling, and the most fulfilling thing is, of course, going to be Christ, the gospel. I did a video a couple years ago called "Does God Send People to Hell?" And in that video, I talked about hell, but I also talked about what hell really is. This is hell, materialism, the idea that you constantly keep getting new things. It becomes a drug addiction. You have built your identity on something other than besides God. This idea that, you need this new best thing. You need to constantly keep building your own kingdom. You need to constantly keep fulfilling it. And that creates hell in people to the point where they're so miserable they can never get away from it. So
Right.
like C.S. Lewis depicts hell as what everyone thinks heaven is. It's in hell, called the gray town. Anything you think, you get. You can just think you want this sandwich, you want this mansion, you think it, you get it. And everyone there is miserable.
Right.
And that's what hell is.
Reminds me of that mouse experiment I'm sure you're familiar with, where they give the mouse the utopia, the mice civilization, the utopia, and things go totally off the rails. You're familiar with that experiment?
Ah,
Right.
yeah, that's a great study. It's a study about all these mice, and they give them literally everything, and they die in a couple generations because they, my honest view is that beings need a combination of suffering and pleasure, constantly going back and forth to grow, to sort of evolve, to get to a higher, more virtuous state, as I would put it. And
Right.
when you just give one of the other, you always create misery. But we
Right.
need this sort of pushing this back and forth, and this goes back. This is a long-standing Christian tradition.
Well, I think there's a certain amount of entropy just baked into the programming of this reality. And, you're going to struggle X amount. I don't think it's as quantifiable as, like, let's say bits. You're going to have 100 struggle bits. And so if you're perfectly great your whole life, those 100 struggle bits are coming. Struggle bits isn't a thing. I think, Mike, this has been, I think, hopefully the first of many of these discussions. I can go on for hours and hours and hours. Your time is valuable. I say we keep them wanting more, and we plan on trying to get back together next week. Maybe do like a couple minutes of Q&A and then let you off the hook for the night.
Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, there's plenty of things we can talk about. We can talk about archaeology. I do want to do a live sometime on the serpent in Genesis 3 because I have some data that your viewers will probably like. I can show you that that is actually Satan, or most likely is, because some people think it's a talking snake. And I'm like, no, yes, it is, but it's also not. There's some interesting things that the authors are doing there about the serpent in Genesis 3. In fact, I want your viewers to do something. Go look up the ISV translation. This is the International Standard Version, and just read Genesis 3. You won't see the word serpent at all. Not at all in the ISV translation. They use a different word to translate there, which you'll find interesting, I think.
So let's do. I certainly think that Hasatan is the adversary, and I think we have that discussion. I've made about 10 notes for 10 different hour-long discussions we can have. I would like to have people promote this. I think this is really important. I don't want to overstate myself, but I certainly want to make sure people understand the privilege that we have of talking to Mike. He's gifted. I pray that God blesses his ministry. And I think that the balance of where we're at, we haven't gotten into
You're
the
too kind.
controversial stuff yet, but I think we might talk Age of Earth at some point. But we started talking simulation tonight, biblical history, Genesis 3, viewer questions. Like, there's so much we can do. So please do follow Mike. And then, Mike, I think you and I should talk. I think we should try and get this on the YouTube. We'll get it on my YouTube. I think we should try and build a buzz around this because I would like this series to be in front of as many Christians and even atheists as possible. So that's where I'm at with it. Hello, guys. Does
Oh,
anybody?
yeah. Now that I'm done with school, I'm all happy to do more interviews.
Okay, great. Yeah, we got to build them. Share his content, you guys. Show him love, please. Does anybody have a question for me or for IP on my side? IP, if if your viewers have a question for me or for you, let's do a couple minutes of Q&A.
Someone asked me any good analogies for the Trinity, and I think I've got the best analogy for the Trinity. It's called the show Moon Knight. Because in the show, the main character is set up as somebody with multiple personality disorder, but he really doesn't have that. Because someone with multiple personality disorder is like one conscious agent that switches between different alters. But in the show, he is like three conscious centers of consciousness in his mind that talk to each other, and they share the same mind, but there's three centers of consciousness. So I think that's a pretty good analogy, not a perfect representation, but a good analogy for the Trinity. In fact, my whole view of the Trinity is we need to start thinking about the Trinity in philosophy of mind. Stop trying to compare the Trinity to physical things. It's going to fail. Compare the Trinity to an agent. And so that's my whole take on that.
I like that. I would say this is very like base level, but first off, I don't fully understand the Trinity, nor do I know if we will be able to understand it with our finite brain space. Although I do think we have cloud-based access, but that's another conversation. I would say the idea of space, time, and matter. This reality it needs all three. They're three separate things, but they create the reality as a whole. Something kind of along those lines. That's kind of where I would go. But I like what you said as well. So there's a couple other things. Rich wants to talk about us to have a talk about the paganism thing. Not this isn't the place. We'll have the discussion about that maybe down the road. Let's see. I got another question for you.
Mm-hmm.
It says James Tabor. He has some alternative views. What do you think of his work in general?
James Tabor. That name sounds familiar. I have not read a lot of him, to be honest. It's hard to keep up with everyone. Oh yeah, does a lot of research on early Christianity. I have not read a lot of
Okay.
his work, to be honest. It's hard to keep up with every
Right.
potential scholar out there in every book you could possibly read. So I cannot comment on that until I've read more of his stuff.
So, a question. I think this would be kind of an interesting one for the two of us to answer because I assume these will be different answers. But Road Rashak asks, Road Rash, I can read. Were there two types of people in Genesis? Again, I think we're going to have a different discussion here, but I'll answer my side. I think that it was Adam and Eve, and then I think that they had obviously people, and it's hard to say how many children they had in between those, not in between those after that. It sounds like they had a bunch of children. It's possible that there was a lot of reproductive activity in that bloodline. When Cain left, he ran into others. That's where I'm at. I think Adam and Eve, and we're all descendants of that. I think the genetics say that we are all rooted back to a man, a woman. Every human that they've ever researched, they call it mitochondrial Eve, mitochondrial Adam. I think we're all descendants of Adam and Eve. I think it was the biblical story at face value, but that's my take, and I think Mike's is different.
So there's a book that came out called The Genealogical Adam by a scientist called Joshua Swamidass, and he basically said there's a difference between our genetic ancestors and our most recent genealogical ancestors. Like everyone today is all descended from some guy that lived about 2,000 years ago because of the way it sort of spread out. So technically, everyone today is descended from genealogically from one man and one woman, uh, basically from about 2,000, maybe 3,000 years ago at the most. So it'd be very easy for us all to be descended from Adam and Eve genealogically thinking. Um, the reason is because you could check out Swamidass's book. And so, yeah, I do think we're all definitely descended from Adam and Eve for sure, uh, because that's just how genealogical descent works. And he basically shows this in his book. So it's a very interesting approach. And in my view, it was the last linchpin in the whole issue of theistic evolution, how it can work. And Swamidass has put the last pin in there to make everything work. So yeah, I do affirm we are all descended from Adam and Eve.
Awesome. Just a comment from some rando. I believe she says she loves you. IP
Thank you.
loves your work. She disagrees with the theory of evolution, but loves the work you're doing. Thank you, brother. So I think that's going to be kind of the sentiment a lot on my side because I'm more of a biblical literalist. I don't like to say that term because I know you are as well. But look, I'm not full young Earth creation. I'm kind of agnostic in it. I don't know if somehow it came out that it was millions and billions years old, it wouldn't affect my faith. I just
That's my entire approach. Just like, look, just like people, I see a lot of Christians like Jason Lau spend way too much time debating evolution. And I'm like, you know what? Get back to the center of this. Just sidestep it. Just be like, even if evolution is true, it doesn't threaten any core doctrine. I mean, again, I'm a theistic evolution. I affirm Adam from we're all descended from him. I affirm that he was a priest in the Garden of Eden. I affirm that Eve was also a priestess in the garden. I think that was important. In fact, when it says in Genesis 2, when it says, Adam needs a helper, that's a very, scholars like Robert Alter have noted that's a weird word to use because it more or less refers to like a military sustainer. So Eve was sort of like Adam's general, like, like, or brigadier, or, like major general or something. Like she was very important aspect in there. It was not just something like, oh, he needs like, someone to help tend the hedges. She was part of battle strategy kind of. That's the way you got to think of Eve.
Oh, absolutely. Women, that's, I think, a huge misnomer in the hierarchical structure that God had put in. Woman is every bit as important as man. There's no reason to argue which is more important. It's just God isn't a God of redundancy. It's different skill sets, different intentions, but combined, it's a force that has driven the story of man for its entire history. So, yeah, I think that's a whole other conversation. But let's see. Rich keeps wanting me to ask you about the pagan Mother's Day thing. We're not doing that, Rich. We might do that later. We're not doing that. Do you have any questions on your side?
Nothing I can think right now. Some people are asking my opinions on other TikTok creators, but I'm not going to do that right now either. But no, I mean, we can always do another live, do questions and stuff. I've told people that if I get to 10,000 followers, I'll do more lives, more Q&As on TikTok. And I'm almost there. I got to get like 600 more and I'll be there.
Right. Okay. So what I'll do, I'm really bad at ending these things because I just yammer on for hours. But I think this is a good ending point for today. I would ask you guys, please follow IP. Please share his videos. Please check out his YouTube channel. If you feel led to support him, he is very important. You heard tonight how valuable he is for kingdom work. So if anybody's led to support him, I assume on his link tree he's got that information, Cash App, Patreon, sharing his videos. The goal, he talked about the Great Commission. What we're both trying to do is validate Scripture, defend God to a largely secular world, and represent Jesus in a way we're supposed to be able to give an account that compels people. Not just believe in Jesus or you're going to hell, but like, look, logically, rationally, God makes sense, and God of the Bible makes the most sense. So we're working together, and I ask you to support him any way you can. Closing thoughts, brother?
No, I really appreciate working together. I think this is great. I love doing it. Again, last year I got in a big fight with an Egyptologist, and he was right, I was wrong, and I accepted that, and I've been working with him since. And I think that's what Christians need to do. We need to come together despite disagreements and work together. I mean, I had an hour-long documentary I pulled on YouTube because he convinced me of that, and I think this is what we need to do.
Right, and if you're confident that well, how do I want to say this? If your intention is the truth, then you can't let your own bias cloud the potential of getting it, right? And so Christians, iron sharpening iron, the devil wants us separate, and it's a human nature thing to say, you disagree with me, you told me, well, I fight you now. No, we need to lean on each other. If you can't defend what you said, if you can't defend what you believe or you're thinking, then if somebody attacks you on it, you're going to get pissed off. But if you're wrong, like you said, be wrong. And I can tell you this, we talked about it over messaging. I'm going to, what he said in a very loving way, he said, do your research. You got to make us look good. You can't make us look stupid. So, not stupid. That was my own word. But
no, you don't make us look stupid. Yeah. You don't make us look stupid. Don't worry about that.
I didn't mean stupid.
I mean, we all make ourselves look stupid somehow, and that's what I loved about the book, The Great Divorce, is that he gets to heaven and he's like, that's just the way it is. This is who we are. Accept who we are. We are fallible, wonderfully made creatures.
Amen. Okay, well, I'm going to let Mike off the line for tonight, but let's maybe kind of just plan on Tuesdays. Do you think Tuesdays will work for you going forward? Do you think like every Tuesday or every other week or something?
I'd try it every other week. I got a lot of research right now to do on the documentary hypothesis. Okay. For those who don't know, that's the theory that the Pentateuch was originally 4 different sources and combined into one, and I'm going to be critiquing that in some upcoming series. So I got a lot of research to do on that. So maybe every other week would be perfect.
Okay, so planning on every other week. What I want to do, there's been a lot of great questions in here. Just an idea I had. I know we want to answer the questions. That's a big part of what TikTok is. But email questions. We were even thinking about doing like a $5, get your questions answered at any point. We split it because obviously it costs money to keep the operations going. But we're sorry for not being as interactive. But anyways, we're planning to do more of these. Get your questions together. If you do want to ask them, you can always ask us on Discord. And again, support Mike, please. I appreciate your time and what you're doing, man.
Yeah, you too, man. I appreciate you doing all you're doing.
I tried to hang up the call and I reported him.
You have got